Hello everybody, this is Tip Top MTG here today with another Magic the Gathering video. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about my top 10 favorite cards from 2020. Now this is a little bit of a different video from what I normally do, but essentially, I'm going to be taking my favorite 10 cards that were newly printed in 2020, whether they were in a standard product, whether they were in even maybe a secret layer, although probably not, Commander Legends, the new Commander decks, Jumpstart, any of that. And so I'm going to talk about my 10 favorite cards. I'm going to talk about why they're my favorite, and a lot of the time it has to do more with just it being fun. I'm not talking about cards that are the most powerful in any way. A lot of these cards I love because they are so janky, and they have a lot of potential to be creative. Before we get into this, I figure, you're going to hear my top 10 favorite cards. I should probably explain what type of cards really resonate with me. And those are the cards that aren't super obvious. If you have a card that's a zombie and it gives all zombies +10/+10, okay, you're building this in a zombie deck. But if you have a card that does some very interesting effect, but what you do with that effect is not very obvious, that's what I like. I like that I can take a card and I can do 17 different things with it, because then that card becomes, unique. And when you use it, you feel a lot better. And so I value those cards over normal, obviously you're going to run this with zombies, or obviously you're going to run this with land ramp. Stuff like that. So why don't we jump into this, starting at number 10. And this one's a little bit cheaty. I'm talking about 6 cards here, but I'm going to talk about the Pathways. And I honestly think the Pathways are one of my favorite sets of lands. I mean, they are purely better than a basic land, outside of the fact that they cannot be fetched. And they don't have that basic type, which can matter to some things. And of course, they don't have their land type, which, that is a pretty big downside. But overall, it just feels like Magic. I don't know. Something about it has this very big feeling of Magic. And I know I said I like cards that, you can play them in multiple ways. This is not that. I just like the concept of the basic land, of these lands. You can kind of treat them as slightly worse basic lands, or you can treat them as slightly worse dual lands. They're worse dual lands in the fact that if you're playing like a deck that wants to make sure that it has all of its colors, you may play, say, for instance, Crag Crown Pathway for red, and then you later need it for green. But the advantage is you get to play it the turn it comes out. And honestly, this almost, the big part about this is that I really like modal double face cards, and I'm excited to see where they go into the future. And this is one of their most used applications. There aren't too many other modal double face cards that really see play. And I'm excited to see where it kind of goes from there. And I think, honestly, the main reason they're here is that choice is my favorite part of Magic. And what I mean by that is that, if you have a Magic game and you really don't have choices, if you are just top decking and you're just always playing your stuff, that's not fun. When you have a card that can do multiple things, then you have to think, when am I going to use this? How am I going to use this? How is this going to be most effective? And then you get to this point where the more skilled player wins, not the luckier player wins. So I really like choice, and modal double face cards and Pathways and things really show that. And obviously Pathways a little less choice heavy, but again, if you know your deck well, you're going to be able to make the better choice of color. Like if you know your deck is really red heavy, but it's a girl deck, you may play it for red, even though that's not super obvious in your hand at the moment. So yeah, lots of things. I love that it promotes skill heavy gameplay. Next we have Mythos of Aluna. It's a 4-cost blue sorcery, and it says create a token that's a copy of target permanent. Now, it does have some other text. If for the 2 mana you spend a green and a red, then you can also make that permanent fight something if it's a creature. Now, I like this not because of the fight, but mostly because of that create a copy of target permanent. This card allows you to do so many things. And yes, it is, the big difference here. Okay, we have some spells. Some spells are just, copy target creature you control. Okay, so we have a lot of limiters there. It has to be a creature and it has to be something you control. This doesn't have to be that. It can be any permanent. It can be a land. And it doesn't have to be something you control. So what I really like doing with this is finding really janky things and putting them together. For instance, we have Double Visions that was printed in Core Set 2021. And it's really fun to cast Mythos of Aluna on Double Visions, because you have 1 Double Vision, you cast Mythos of Aluna, you get 2 copies now of Double Vision, meaning you now are up to 3. You do it again, now you're up to You are now up to 7 copies, and there's so many janky things. But the thing is, this is, like I talked about, it's a very versatile card. It can also go into, be a really good removal spell if you're in red, green, and blue. You can copy the biggest thing, make it fight into something else, you get a big creature. It can help you ramp up technically if you really need it. Like this spell technically creates a land token if you need it, and it can create your opponent's land token. It's just so versatile. And again, it's one of those cards that not only can it be used in multiple janky fun ways, but it also is a card that requires lots of choice. Do you copy your land? Do you copy your creature? Do you copy your opponent's thing? And so again, this is kind of a step up above the pathways because of its multiple uses, and it's a lot more fun to do as well. Next, we have 9 Lives. It is a 3-cost white enchantment with hexproof, and it says if a source would deal damage to you while this is on the battlefield, put an incarnation counter on 9 lives, and when there are 9 or more incarnation counters on it, exile it, so you're going to be able to prevent 9 sources of damage, and then when this thing leaves the battlefield, you lose the game. Idea is you're invincible, you kind of can take 9 more hits, kind of like a cat has 9 lives. Now, this is a little bit less, it can be used as everything, and it almost didn't make the list, but, something about this card is so fun to play. Taking it, preventing a bunch of damage, and then giving it to your opponent. Yes, that's probably the number one thing I do with this, but there are some really interesting things you can do. You could counter the triggered ability. Lots of fun things, and it's just something we don't have a lot of in standard, so I really appreciated its printing, especially in a color that normally doesn't get it. So I really appreciated the printing of this, and that's why I put it in at number 8. Next we have Ineaz, the Gale Force. So moving out of standard, we have this 5-cost blue legendary creature Jin, 4/4 with flying, and then you can pay 3 and give attacking creatures with flying +1/+1 until end turn. And then whenever you attack with 3 or more creatures with flying, you kind of get to do a rotation of permanents around the battlefield. And again, this is one of those things where it's a very fun, very abnormal thing that happens in Magic. It's not, I'm winning by hitting you with creatures. It's, oh, I'm giving you my permanent, and then I'm getting yours. Or, if you're playing in with multiple people, oh, we're all swapping around permanents, which means that I get to take your biggest permanent, and then I get to give this person a bad permanent. Like, I want a card that says, whenever you draw a card, lose a life, or whenever you cast a spell, lose a life. There's so many fun things you can do with this, both in, historic where it's legal and just Commander in general. While it is a little bit more narrow than something like Mythos of Aluna, it does allow you to have a lot of creative card choice, and it allows you to play some cards that maybe you normally wouldn't. And I think that shows the signs of a great card, because if a card allows you to use other cards that you normally wouldn't, I consider that to be pretty great. And it works really well with 9 lives. Either way, next we have Deflecting Swat. So this is a 3-cost red instant, and it says if you control a commander, you may cast the spell without paying its mana cost. And then you may choose new targets for target spell or ability. Now, there's a whole cycle of these, one in each color in the commander decks this year. And I think they're all an interesting concept. I like all of them except for the blue one. I would say the blue one is the most powerful, but, free counter spells are not something I really like. And so, yeah, there are 2 things that I love doing. First off, I love redirecting spells. Why? Because you're almost countering the spell, but you're also probably making yourself benefit. For instance, an opponent has a spell, take an extra turn after this one. Well, or target player takes an extra turn after this one, which is on a lot of spells. Oh, for 3 mana, you can deflect it. But you add that surprise cost, because when you're playing a redirect, you are doing it as a surprise. If an opponent knows it's coming, you're not going to get any value off of it, other than the fact that they're not casting spells, which can be really great. But the fact that you can be tapped out and still have this in your hand, or be in red. No one's thinking about how red can stop this spell from happening. And so I really like redirect spells for that reason. I actually have a whole deck that's based around redirect spells and like redirecting combat, redirecting damage, all sorts of fun things. And this is just a really fun card that is surprising. It gives you that surprise factor, and I think could arguably be in any red deck. I mean, it almost always protects your commander unless a board wipe is happening. And if that's happening, most likely everyone is being affected by it unless it's something like Cyclonic Rift. So yeah, for those reasons, I really like the card. Next, we have Obeka, Brute Chronologist. It's a 4-cost blue, black, and red legendary creature, ogre, wizard, 3/4, and you can tap it, and whoever's turn it is may end the turn. This is on the list, very similar to Mythos of Aluna, for having so many uses. Of course, you're going to be running this in a deck with lots of cards that are doing things until end of turn, but it also allows you to do some very political plays, maybe stopping an opponent that's going off on another person's turn, or making deals, and the fact that it is a universal effect is really great. You know, it can protect your stuff on your turn. Basically, it stops your opponents from casting spells on your turn, because theoretically, you can counter them at any time by tapping Obeka. And again, I just think it's a fun commander, and I know it is one of the more powerful cards, and I generally try to stay away from powerful cards, but I think it's also just really fun, and something that is always really cool to do, because it does change so many cards. And it's very similar to Inyaz, where it's taking cards that you may not have played and turning them into really good cards. I mean, Active Treason, not a great card in Commander, but in combination with Obeka, it can be a pretty good card. I mean, stealing something and keeping it forever, or even just using it to untap Obeka, can be really cool things, and so I think it's very interesting. Next we have Discontinuity. It's a kind of similar to Obeka, but it's a 6-cost blue instant, and it says as long as it's your turn, spells you cast, this spell costs 2 blue less to cast, and you end the turn. Now, why is this above Obeka, someone who can be in the command zone, be there every game, and is repeatable? Well, because your opponent sees it coming. I really like this spell for 2 reasons. First off, it kind of disincentivizes, if your opponent knows you at least have one of them in your deck, them to do things on your turn, which is always feels good. But again, Discontinuity can be used in many different ways. You can use it to cheat some effect. You can maybe loop it to gain infinite turns using Narset's Reversal or something weird. You can use it on your opponent's turn to stop their spells. You can use it on your turn to, you know, do something that a card is not intended to do, and it always has that surprise factor, very similar to the redirect spell. I mean, when people think of what are they going to do, they're thinking, oh, they're going to counterspell it. But they're not really thinking, oh, they're going to end the turn. And so for that, I really like it. And of course, it is in standard and historic, which does mean I get to play with it a lot more. So I really do enjoy the card. Next we have Brash Taunter, and this is where we're starting to get into cards that, like, I really love. This card is a 5-cost 1/1 with Indestructible, and when it is dealt damage, it deals that much damage to target opponent. And then you can pay 3, tap, and it fights another target creature. So, looking at it, it's a 1/1 with Indestructible. First off, that's pretty cool. I mean, it can infinitely block things, but it also means that you are able to kind of redirect a lot of damage. It stops combat, but I like it for the janky things you can do with it. One of my favorite things to do in a kind of big red kind of deck is to get out of Brash Taunter, get out of Fiery Emancipation, which triples all damage from sources you control, and then you just stomp. You know, the Bone Crusher Giant's adventure ability does 2 damage. You do 2 damage to Brash Taunter, which then gets multiplied to 6, and then Brash Taunter is going to deal 6 damage, which then gets multiplied to 18, and you get this really awesome combo that's really fun. It can be used just as a really good way to stall the game for your other combo-y pieces to go onto place. It can be your win con, and then it has that fight ability, which can just really quickly punish your opponents for having big creatures. So, yeah, I really like the card. Next, we have Ashik Nightmare Muse. Now, this one, I actually, I considered it bumping it a little bit lower on the list, but then I realized how much I really liked it. Now, I don't love being milled, and I don't love my stuff being exiled, but, that's how this card is normally played. So I will say, if you're just using the +1 and -3, it's not my favorite card. It is kind of boring and control-y, but I play a Brawl deck that is focused all around the ultimate. It's going to get there, whether it used to be by proliferating, but it's going to get there eventually. And so the goal of the deck is to exile as many things and then get the best cards. And so, yes, I do use his other abilities to get cards into exile, but I think if you're using Ashik for that -7, it kind of turns Magic into a whole nother game, and it can be incredibly fun. Now, I'm sure to my opponent it can be infuriating. I mean, I remember when Theros Beyond Death first came out, I had a really fun time messing with this Uro deck because, I'm exiling his graveyard constantly, because that's kind of what Ashik is going to do, is exile things. And yeah, I just really enjoyed it. I know this is probably going to be one of my more controversial, I guess, kind of picks, because it does have some very serious viability in terms of controlliness. It's definitely not the most viable thing in the world, though. But, it may not be super fun to play against. I just think that ultimate provides some interesting play patterns and the ability to use cards that you normally wouldn't. And at number 1, we have Ashik, Soul of the Wild. Now, this one's a little bit weird, but it's a 5-cost green legendary creature elemental, and its power and toughness are equal to the number of lands you control. That's not why I like the card. Why I like the card is that it says, non-token creatures you control are forest lands in addition to their other types. And I don't know why I like this card so much. Something about taking your creatures, and, you know, honestly, when I first saw this card, I thought it was awesome without the fact that they can tap for mana. I was thinking to myself, oh, so you can do some kind of interesting shenanigans where a lot of, you know, removal doesn't work, like Banishing Light, which I still think is a better removal spell than some people give it credit for. 3 mana, get rid of anything. I mean, yes, they could remove it in the future, but I generally think it's a pretty good card. But, like, that doesn't work anymore because it has to target a non-land. And so there are so many little things that people don't realize when facing Ashe that it's so much fun. She's my favorite commander in Brawl right now, just as a mono-green kind of big stuff. She's great for ramping, and it is just overall really fun to turn one permanent type into another. And I don't know exactly why I put it number 1. I know that's not the most satisfying ending, but I just really enjoy playing with the card every time I get it, especially mixing that in with the influx of landfall cards. It is just really, really fun. And yeah, so I really enjoy Ashik. Now, those are my top 10 most liked cards from 2020. Now, there are 5 cards that I want to talk about that are my 5, you know, kind of most hated printed cards of 2020. And I'm going to talk very briefly about this. This is kind of just a bonus at the end of the video because I was thinking to myself, what do I not like in Standard or not like that was printed? So let's take a look at them all at the same time. We have Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath. This one, way too dominant. It basically became a staple. Kinnan kind of ruined Brawl for me. Muxus, I do play a Goblins deck, so putting it on here was a little bit hard, but I feel like Muxus pushed Historic into such a place where, you know, you had to be a fast deck, and it did kind of lower the diversity of decks that were played, and that was one of the great parts about it. Thieves Guild Enforcer is just one of those very powerful 1/1s, and it's almost here just to represent all of the rogues that are really annoying to play against, and so I thought that I would include that there. And then moving outside of that, we have Rick, Steadfast Leader, representing all of the cards from Secret Lair, The Walking Dead. I think I've talked about it numerous times, but I think it is one of the worst ideas they have ever done, and so yeah, I think they're ruining Magic as a whole. So we have Uro ruining Standard, or at least was, Kinnan ruining Brawl, Muxus making Historic worse, Thieves Guild Enforcer making Standard worse, and Rick, Steadfast Leader, ruining Magic as a whole. So yeah, I want to know what you guys think. What are your favorite cards that were printed this year, and what cards did you not like that were printed this year? Leave those in the comments down below. I would love to see them. If you enjoyed, please hit that like button, subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video.